I'm Jeannie Scott. Welcome to the Upper Craft Room, where we make a mess and create something beautiful out of it. Today we're creating a couple of sympathy cards that unfortunately we have two friends that have lost some loved ones, so we will be creating these today. I'll be using the Stampwheel. It's not the 2.0, but I will eventually get the 2.0. And I will also be building out the layered stamp set. This is an oldie but a goodie. We're going to a throwback because it's one of my favorite stamp sets, and it's also the stamp set that I very first purchased when I first started stamping about 8 years ago. This is the Peony Bouquet stamp set. And these are just some examples of the stamp set that I practiced with, and I absolutely love how this comes together. There's a few things that I had to troubleshoot, but thankfully Altenew comes out with, they give you a guide with every layering stamp set that you purchase, which is amazing because it's very helpful. So I'm here, I'm looking at the outline and I'm deciding if I like that outline or not. I think that black is very stark, and so I'm going to decide if I'm going to actually use that outline layer or not. I will use it once just to see if I can make it work with the same color. But in the set, you'll see, in the guide rather, you'll see it comes with an outline layer, it comes with a base layer, and then you have two detailed layers, and then you end up with that beautiful, gorgeous flower in the end. So here I am using the outline layer, and I am going to line that up with that circle at the top so that I can use that as a guide to keep these in alignment as I layer them. I am going to stamp out the outline layer first, keeping that circle towards the top. But I'm going to use, instead of that stark black, I'm going to try it with the cranberry. I believe it's cranberry. I'll link all the inks and just names of everything down below. But I am using My Favorite Things inks, and I'm going to ink this up. I'm going to use the same color that I'm actually going to use on the details in the peony, and so I'm going to use that on the outline layer as well. And I do have to ink that up and get my first layer down so I have a guide of where everything else is going to be, how I'm going to line that up. I'm using the Tidy Towel to clean off my outline stamp. I'm removing that, and now I'm lining up my base layer, again using that circle as the guide, pointing it towards the top to get that second layer on top of the outline layer. And now I'm turning it in 180-degree angle, and now the circle, you'll see that little hole is at the bottom, and I'm going to flip my plate over my turntable, and I'm going to add my first detailed layer. You'll see that in the guide, that's the first detailed layer, and it tells you how to line it up with those little bold lines in the center. I still had a very hard time lining these details up. This first one wasn't as hard as the second one. I did figure out there's a little piece that I'll show you here in a second. But first, I had a problem with my sticky mat, so I flipped it over to see if I could get that a little stickier. I think it just needs to be rinsed and bring back some of that stick. And so now, again, I have to line that up since I had to fix that. I had to line the base layer up again. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, now, again, flipping that plate 180-degree angle, getting that hole at the bottom centered, and then lining up that detail layer. I'm going to bring in my Spellbinder pokey tool. This is a very old tool, but, you know, why replace something that works? And that little detail there, I'm lining up with where it goes on the flower, and that helps me get this aligned perfectly. Again, keeping that hole at the bottom, lining that up, and sticking it to my turntable. And now I'm going to turn it to the right, just 100 and what would we call that, an 80-degree angle maybe? So now 90-degree angle, yep. And I'm keeping that lined up. Okay, so now I'm bringing in that fourth layer, which is another detail layer, and I had a very tough time lining this up. I don't eventually end up using it because I just didn't think it looked good, which you'll see here in a second what I mean. But I am going to try to line these up where they come together right there where I'm pointing to with the pokey tool. I don't think it's right though, so don't follow my guide. I don't end up using this layer. I couldn't get it to work. And I'm sure it's me. It's not them. I'm the problem. It's me for sure. So now I'm going to use the lightest ink in the pink arena of, I think it's bubblegum. I'm not positive. It is my favorite things. And again, like I said, everything's going to be listed down below in the description. But here I am inking up my base layer with the lightest pink that I have out. And again, lining that up with the circle up top and giving that a good press so I get a good impression. And there, it lined up perfectly. I was very proud of myself for that one. Although it was because the stamp set's so easy, that first piece to get lined up. Now here, the second piece wasn't as hard as that third piece though. So here we go. The third piece, I'm sorry, it's the fourth piece. The third piece was a little bit easier to line up. I'm using the cranberry ink and inking up that first detailed layer, which is the third layer in the stamp set. And I think that absolutely turned out gorgeous. Is that beautiful? It really doesn't need anything more anyway, but I did go ahead and use that fourth layer. And again, I didn't care for it, which you'll see here in a second. I'm using the same color, which is the cranberry, I believe. And I am inking up that last layer, lining it up, keeping the circle all the way to the right of the stamp wheel, or the base of the stamp wheel, and giving that a good impression. But see, it just looks too messy and it's too dark and bold. It does dry lighter, but I don't like it. So I didn't end up using it, and you can see I didn't end up using the outline. I just thought that was too stark. So I just used the second base layer and the first, the base layer and then the very first detail layer. Now I'm bringing in the fancy leaves. This is a lot easier to work with. The reason I'm using the stamp wheel in this and not the Misti is because when you're layering stamps, I find it much easier to stamp out. In the Misti, I would have to like keep positioning these and using the same, I would just have to like keep switching out the stamps. Where with the stamp wheel, I don't have to do that. I can just put all the stamps on here and just stamp them out and leave them. So I can do multiple much faster than if I was using the Misti. I do definitely love the Misti though. It's got its place, and the stamp wheel has its place. It's not great for some things that I think that the Misti is better for. Not that it's not great. It's just I think the Misti is better for, but in this case, I think the stamp wheel is much better. Have no idea why I turned my stamp wheel. That doesn't even make sense to me, but I figured it out and I turned it back. And now I'm trying to line up the detail layer of the fancy leaves. I love these fancy leaves. They are absolutely beautiful, and they're very easy to line up. So I am flipping that turntable, getting the hole to the bottom, and I am going to now ink up the detailed layer. This time I'm using Jelly Bean Green. On the first layer I used the Limeade from my favorite things. Now I'm using the Jelly Bean Green. These stamp sets are great they dry very fast, and so they're great for this type of stamping because you need your images to dry so you can keep moving. So, and look at that detail. Isn't that just gorgeous? I don't think it needs anything else, but I do go ahead and bring in that third detailed layer and line that up. The camera is focusing on my arm. It doesn't know where to focus right now. Sorry about the blur, but there we go. And now I'm lining up that third piece, and I'm going to ink that up again with the Jelly Bean Green after I figure out which stamp I'm supposed to stamp. Okay, and there we go. Now I have to clean off my plate. I'm trying to keep the ink from going onto the cardstock, but in the end it gets all over the cardstock. But it doesn't really matter because I'm cutting these out anyway, so I don't really care. I did try though. And that is the third layer, and you'll see I don't think it makes much of a difference, but it is absolutely, look at that stunning leaf. That is beautiful. I just love that leaf. They turned out great. We got a little drama going on there. Okay, so now I'm bringing in the Prayer Stampin' Cut, which I thought was very apropos for the sympathy cards that we're creating today. And this is from Hero Arts, and it has a stamp and a die. And then I have this knockoff stamp set, which is just, I just love the sentiment, which is why I got it. I don't originally, I don't recommend these stamps because they're made out of silicone, but I did use it in this case because I just very much love the sentiments. Now I'm bringing in the Misti because I left the leaf stamps on the stamp wheel because I wanted to create more stamps. And for this type of stamping here where we're just going straight down and I don't have to line anything up, I think the Misti works great and it's better. I did recently purchase the sticky mat from Gina K Designs. This sticky mat, what a brilliant design. It is made out of photopolymer. All the sticky mats are made out of photopolymer from the major companies like Altenew and Waffle Flower. But Gina did something amazing. She created 2 background layers that go with the stamp. So it's multi-purpose now. You can use it as a sticky mat, but then also use the 2 sides as background layers. How ingenuity. I mean, that is like just so innovative. I love that she did that and she took it to the next level. Okay, so now bringing out the prayers stamp and cut. What I'm doing is bringing out the prayer, actually the stamp. And what happens when I bring this out of the package, I notice that the sending hugs and is stuck to the prayers. They do cut out separately, so I don't end up cutting them apart. However, I don't think I would want it ever to say prayers, sending hugs, and so I would stamp those or cut those separately if I've in the future. I just didn't feel it was necessary this time because I'm just stamping it out and cutting it out. And then I can just cut out the sending prayers and as well. And it's not going to line up on my card like it is set up in the stamp. But again, like I said, in the future, I will cut that apart because it just doesn't make sense to me to have those in that order. So now I'm bringing in the Hero Arts Intense Black ink, and I want to heat emboss this. I'm not positive about inks at this point in the video. I know now, but in the video when I was recording this, I didn't know about inks very much. So I was looking to see if I could heat emboss this, and it doesn't say anything about heat embossing. That was a hint that it probably doesn't. However, I wanted to test it because I needed to learn, and it didn't say it didn't do it. So I went ahead and stamped it out and, inked up my stamp and stamped it out and did try to do the heat embossing, and I'll show you the results here in just a minute. This is a new stamp. It's not new. I've had it forever, but I've never used it. So it's new in the sense that it's never been used. So it didn't stamp out very well. So I did have to do this a couple of times because of that coating that's on the stamps when they come. And they've never been used before. They have this coating. So it keeps the stamp from really getting a good impression. So I did condition this a little bit by inking it up. I should have just rubbed it out and got all that conditioning off, but I didn't realize I needed to do that at the time, so I just stamped it out 3 times, and I finally got that nice crisp impression I was going for. So now, like I said, I'm just using my guide because I don't have copy paper in my craft room, which I need to bring some in there, so I have it. But I am embossing. I'm just using Wow embossing powder. Actually, I think this is clear Hero Arts embossing powder, and I'm just bringing it in and getting that all powdered up, and it is sticking a little bit, although the ink dries very fast because I've since learned that it's just a dye ink. It has no pigment in it whatsoever, and dye inks dry very, very fast. So I brought in my Ranger tool, which is the heat tool. I love this Ranger heat tool because it doesn't blow hard, so it doesn't warp the paper, but yet it still gets very hot. So you'll see it melts all of that embossing powder. Okay, see there, it starts melting. It got so hot I actually had to bring in my my clothespin to hold the paper. And you'll see I got a little bit of shine on here, but it wasn't nothing to write home about. I will not use the Hero Arts in the next project. I won't use the Hero Arts, I won't use, the Hero Arts ink Intense Black for heat embossing, but at the end of the day, it was fine. As a matter of fact, further in the video, I do stamp this out and heat emboss a couple more times. The results are not impressive. So like I said, I won't do this again in another project. However, I had to learn. I'm a doer. I have to learn on purpose. I can't just get information. And actually, I didn't even know the information. I just wasn't even sure what I was doing. But at the end of the day, like I said, it was fine and the cards turned out beautiful. So now I'm bringing in my cardstock and I am stamping the sentiments. This sentiment, the first one I'm stamping out, I just love it. Like I said, this is not a stamp set that I would recommend. I did just get it off Amazon. It's a knockoff, but I absolutely loved the sentiment, so I did get it. But it's just created out of silicone. It's not photopolymer, so it's not going to last that long. But, you know, for if you're okay with that, then it's fine. So it says, perhaps they are not stars in the sky, but rather openings in heaven where the love of our lost ones pours through and shines down to let us know they are happy. I thought that was just so beautiful and perfect for the friend that I'm giving this to. I think that it'll speak love to her and give her some comfort. And so that's why I chose this stamp. Again, it's a new stamp, so I have to stamp it a couple of times, or ink it a couple of times to get a good impression. And sorry that my camera keeps going in and out. It's a little blurry there. It just doesn't know where to focus. I need to go into the settings and fix that so that it doesn't do that. In my next video, I'll have that fixed, hopefully. Okay, so you'll see that now I've inked it up and stamped it a couple of times, and now I decided to bring in the prayers, sending hugs and prayers stamp again, and I'm going to stamp that out a second time because I am creating 2 cards, and I didn't think about that when I was stamping it the first time. And you'll notice to the right there, I also have another sentiment that I'm using for my second card that says, wishing you hope in the midst of sorrow, comfort in the midst of pain, for my other friend. And I feel like it's from the same knockoff stamp set, but I feel like it's perfect for what I want to say to my 2 friends. So now I'm inking that up again, and I do go ahead and use the powder using the same ink. I'm using the embossing powder on this too, and the results are they're not great. They're not impressive, like I said. And I don't know, I couldn't get, I guess it was just such a new stamp that I had a hard time getting a good impression. But I finally did get a nice crisp black impression even on that second stamp. Now I'm pulling in the heat embossing again, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before, pour the powder over it. It's just clear powder because I wanted it to be black. I wanted my ink to shine through, which honestly, the powder doesn't do anything anyway. It looks like it's sticking. It looks like I might be able to get something out of it. But honestly, I'll show you here in just a second. No, we won't do that again. And you'll see the ink is melting, or the powder is melting onto the stamped image. And it looks like it's melting, but it definitely did not give me any shine. I absolutely got nothing. There was nothing that happened. I mean, I didn't get even the little shine that I got on the first one. I didn't get on this one. So, you know, you live and you learn. Now here I'm bringing in, so this is the Intercut die cutting machine by Gina K Designs, and I am using the Magnetic Magic Mat on instead of the original cutting plate because the Magic Mat is a self-healing mat, and you'll see here when I go to cut that it's a little thicker than the original cutting plate, so I do have to adjust the dials. But the reason that I like the Magic Mat is because I don't feel like I'm going to have to replace it as often. At least that's the goal. But see, now I can't get it through, so I start adjusting my dials on the side of the Intercut machine, which is one thing that I love about the Intercut. I don't have to mess with the plates. I just turn the dial until I can get it to go through and get a good cut. So there I do go ahead and get it through there, and I test it to see if I get a good cut, and I still didn't get that cut out completely. It was still some of it cut and then some of it didn't, so I had to adjust it a little more. So I abandoned that prayers and I just went on to the second one, and then eventually I stamped out and punched out a third one once I got my Intercut, the dials dialed in. Would that be a good way to say it? So I ultimately cut out several of these in the white cardstock so that I could layer these up. And I'm just bringing in a glue pen to glue these together because the glue pen doesn't put out as much glue at once. And I just like this better. It's not forgiving though. It's like you don't have a lot of time to move things around. It dries very quickly. So once you get the glue down and you start sticking these together, you do have to line them up quickly. I didn't fully stick them together until I was ready to get, I just did one letter at a time as I lined them up so that I didn't get them, stuck together without being aligned. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm just layering it on top of that second layer, which was just a scrap piece of cardstock that I used. And like I said, you can tell I'm just layering this up one letter at a time, trying not to let the other letters touch as I put this together, because that glue is very tacky and it's not forgiving at all. It's almost instant. I mean, you got very little time. So once I get those lined up, I stack this several times, 3 to be exact, so that I could get a little bit of dimension, because this prayers it was so flimsy because it's such a delicate print, font, that I had to stamp this out. Some more drama. And so I did, glue these together several times. And then I did that for both of the prayer stamps that I cut out. And I brought in my Spellbinder's Pokey Tool so that I could hold this down and get this all glued up without it moving around. I'm just using the Pokey Tool to clean the glue, the excess glue that was coming through the letters out. There wasn't a lot though, thankfully, because of that glue pen. So I do like it. And now I'm cutting out the fancy leaves. And I run that through a couple of times just to make sure that I have those dials on the right settings and it cuts all the way through. And it did work for the leaves quite well. I have a feeling I'll have to adjust it a couple more times as I get used to using the Magic Mat, because different dyes. So I use all of my dyes, and it doesn't matter what company they come from in this machine. But different companies make their dyes thicker or thinner depending on the company, and so I will probably have to adjust this depending on what company's dyes I'm running through it. And I did run it through a couple of times and was able to get this cut out completely. And then I just cut out the rest of them off camera so you didn't have to watch me do all of them. So I did ultimately off camera start stamping out the more delicate leaves. These are just fun leaves. I just thought maybe if I needed them. I ended up stamping out all of the images just so I had them in case I wanted to use something extra. So I went ahead and cut these out too. And ultimately, I did end up using these on my second card. And you'll see why here in just a bit, because I had issues with which was supposed to be my first card, ended up being my second card. And now I'm cutting out the peonies and lining up those dies. I absolutely love these stamps. They're so elegant and so beautiful. I hope Altenew never retires them. They are quite old. They are a throwback, but they are absolutely just stunning. And I'm looking at my guide because now what happened is I did stamp out all the buds there, but I stamped them separately from the stems. And I was supposed to stamp these together and didn't realize that when I started stamping. So once I started to cut things out and I noticed that the die was all in one, I thought, you know what, I'm just not going to worry about these right now. I'll do that later. I did save them, and I'll stamp the stems at the bottom of these buds later, but I just set them aside for now and didn't end up using them on my cards. And now it's time to create the background. I did create a background earlier this week, and I used all 4 of these inks. I think I used 3 of them. I don't remember. I might have used all 4 of these, but I did use all 4 of these inks, and I'll show you the background that I created using these inks. And you're going to notice that I just think that because, like I told you earlier, this is a dye ink and it's a very fast drying ink, which I didn't realize at the time. And so in the image, you can tell that it's very blotchy. It doesn't blend well because it just dried too quickly. So I decided to create another background today. And I'm only going to use 1 ink. It's more of the corally color that's in the center there. And I believe it's called Red Hot, even though I don't believe it's a red. It's more of a coral. But I want that ombre effect, and that's what I'm going for. But I want it to blend better than being blotchy like that. Although I will use this background. I don't think it's horrible. I will use it in another card, but I was trying to create a very elegant sympathy card. So I decided just to use the 1 ink and do the same thing. 3 sections that will be going from darkest to lightest, but on my card I end up flipping it and going lightest to darkest. I'm bringing in my blending brush. This is just a blending brush from Amazon. Altenew has blending brushes. Gina K Designs has blending brushes. I don't know the difference because these are the only ones I have, but I am going to order them just so I can see as far as what am I trying to say? The quality, what the quality's like between these and the name brand ones, because these are not name brand, these are just knockoffs, and I think they work fine. But I've used makeup brushes before to blend, and they work fine too. So I don't know, like I said, I've never used the high quality ones, so I'll have to get some just so I can test that out. But here I'm just layering the ink all over the card for the first layer, and then I just keep going through and darkening that layer just to get a very ombre effect technique. So that's just the first layer, and you can't really tell the ink is going down in the camera because of the lighting, but I'll show you here in a minute that it is going down. But I also know, I'm keeping in mind that the ink dries a lot lighter than it goes down when you first look at it. So once it dries, it's a lot lighter. So I want to make sure that I'm laying on enough ink that I am going to get the difference in the shades that I want. So I'm using a heavier pressure up top, and then I'm going lighter with lighter pressure. I'm layering more ink up top, and then as I go down, I'm layering less ink. So it's both the pressure and the layering of the inks. I just layer more ink. I just keep putting more ink on top of where I want it darker, and then going down the card with a lighter hand and less ink. And I'll lift that up here in a second and show you what that looks like. And it does blend much better than that first background that I did. So now I'm just going over it, making sure I get all of the white covered and get that really nice. Oh, see my ink pad? It's moving around. I forgot about my ink stand, so I'm going to go get my ink stand and bring that in here now so that I don't have to worry about that ink pad moving around like that while I'm trying to ink up my paper here. So there we go. Layering more ink and getting a really nice dark color up top, and then blending that out throughout for that really pretty, that was loud, blending that throughout, getting that really pretty ombre effect. And I really think it turned out so nice. I just love how it turned out. So now you can see, you couldn't really see when it was laying down, but now you can see it really does have a nice ombre feel. I want to make sure you see that. Yeah. And it blended so much better. It's not blotchy. I really am happy with this background. I think my camera's just really blurry right now, and I'm not sure why. It's not getting a good focus. But I think you can get the gist of what is happening here. I'm trying to adjust my camera so it's not blurry. I should have edited that out, but you got to see all the messiness, right? And so I'm just blending that a little bit more, making sure that I have good coverage, and that it's where I want, and I just blend it till I'm happy with it, and I keep going. I just want to make sure all that white gets covered and that I don't have any white coming through. So as I wrap up and I get this where I want it, the next step is to start deciding how I'm putting my card together. By the way, I am using the Altenew sticky mat on my glass board there, on my glass mat. It is 9x12 sticky mat. I really like it because it really holds the cards well. And there's the difference between the two cards, and you can see, even though there's some blotchiness with the blended one, I do feel like it's a lot more blended than the first one that I did. So that's the one I'm going to end up using on my cards. So here I am cutting out the sending hugs and sentiment. And so I'm just taping it to another piece of paper. It's just a hack I learned from Mindy Egan, actually. And I am cutting that down to the size that I want it. Taping it to the paper, because it's such a small piece of paper, it just gives me more control. And then to get an even cut on each side of the word, I'm just taking the word to the edge of where I cut it, and then that way I'm able to get it centered on both sides by doing that. Now I'm taping it back to, I should have just done it from the beginning, but I needed to flip the sentiment to be able to get the other side anyways. So now I'm just cutting off the opposite side and getting that even with I just want that sentiment very much centered in the middle of that piece of cardstock there. And there we go. Turns out beautiful. So now I'm cutting my card base at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 using the Fiskars trimmer. I did get a new trimmer since then, though. My card stock wouldn't fit in the mini trimmer that I originally used for the others. So now I have the Gina K scoreboard that she just came out with, and I'm scoring it at, I think, 5 1/2. I did kind of mess up on scoring that, so I had to play with it a little bit. And I wanted to show you all my mistakes because they're not all perfect, right? All my cards, I make mistakes too. And sometimes it's messy mistakes and I have to cover them up. And so here I just have to play with this cardstock until I can get that really centered. And it actually took me a little bit to line that up, because once you score it, it's harder to get it lined up, but it is doable. So I just played with it until I got it to where I wanted it and it felt even to me. And I did get it even, so. And here again, I'm still playing with it. I want to make sure. I think that's the second piece of cardstock. So I have 2 pieces now for 2 different cards. And I am finished with the scoreboard. So now I start playing around, and here's where I had a little bit of trouble. So I'm playing around with these backgrounds. And what I figured out was the fancy leaves. Well, first of all, before I get to that, I'm going to distress the edges of this, because you can see all those little hairs, and I want to get the hairs off of that cardstock. And I'm also inserting my sentiments inside the card to make sure that they fit, or to see how far I have to cut them down. And now you'll notice that the edges need a little something something, and all those hairs are there. And so I kind of want to remove the hairs from the edges of the card. So I bring in my distress ink. I think it's called walnut something, but I cut it down first to see if I can, get it a little less, hairy, whatever you want to call that, on the sides, those little pieces. But I just decided that it needed a little more, so this is where I brought in the walnut, stained walnut, I think it is, or walnut stain, distress ink by Ranger. And I'm edging the sides and distressing that a little bit, because I just felt like it needed something, but I couldn't figure out what. And by doing this, I'm also kind of removing some of those hairs and making that a much smoother edge by distressing the sides too. And I like the edges to not be white. I'd like them to be colored. So I just thought that added a little more interest to the card by distressing the sides. To the panel, I guess. Okay, and now so off camera, and I don't know why I didn't leave this in. I did record it, but for some reason it was edited out. But I was playing around with this and deciding the fancy leaves didn't look well with the distressed blended card. So I was trying to figure out how I could make that a little bit more elegant so the fancy leaves matched what I was trying to do there. So I went into my my stamp sets, the Master Layouts by Gina K, and I think this is in Master Layouts 2. Maybe this is 4. I think this is 4, Master Layouts 4. And I cut out the scallop edge. I cut out 2 of them. I'm trying to make those work together to see if I can somehow make this a little bit more elegant. I just didn't think so, but I did think the scalloped edge was a little bit more elegant. So after playing around with this and deciding, back and forth what I was going to do, I ended up setting the blended the blended panel aside and just creating my first card with the scalloped edge, white on white, and it was beautiful, and the fancy leaves goes perfectly with it. So I do end up using the blended for the blended panel for the second card, but look how beautiful those peonies look on that white on white tone, and then bringing in those fancy leaves. Well, first my prayer sentiment. And look at those fancy leaves go perfectly with that scalloped edge. And I just laid the sentiment, the prayers just right over the peonies with the sending hugs right on top of that. I love layering my pieces like that. It just adds so much interest. And so now it's time to put the card together. And I bring in some foam tape so that I can get a little bit of dimension, but not so much dimension that I can't mail it. So this is thinner foam tape, and it's I can't remember what company it's from, but I will link it below. But and so now I'm just cutting the foam tape down to size, and I'm going to pop that up on the card and so that it has that added dimension. I always feel like when it's quiet that I need to be talking and saying something. But now I am trying to, I'm lining this up. I'm not great. This is like my worst nightmare, lining things up and getting that even. But I had to play around with it too. Again, I like to leave some of my mistakes in here so that you can see that I make them too. And it's okay. You just have to play around with it and get it to where you want it. So I pulled it back off, cleaned it up a little bit, and it was still sticky enough that I was able to stick it back down and get it even on my cardstock. And there we go. Beautiful. A little more wrinkled than I liked, but it flattened out. It was fine. I don't think my friend's going to say, oh my gosh, look at this card, you really messed it up, because it turns out beautiful. And here I am adding the peonies. I guess I like to leave in the mistakes because it lets you know that you're not the only one. I make mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes. As a matter of fact, I haven't even been crafting that long. Even though I've had all of my stuff for years, I didn't craft for like 7 years. And so I crafted and bought all kinds of things and was in love with it for a couple of years, like 2 years. And then it all got, I don't know, my craft room, I created a craft room and everything. And then it finally... it just sat for 7 years. And then I recently decided, hey, I've got all this stuff. I want to use it. And then I thought, well, why don't I just create a YouTube channel? So I did. Here we are. So now I did add some foam tape to the peonies and for added dimension. And I am adding glue, it's just Gina K Connect glue to the flowers because I want the peony to be the main focal point. But I do want those peonies, the leaves, the fancy leaves, to be to add that elegance to the card itself. I added a little bit too much glue here, so I'm sopping it up with my finger so it doesn't leak out the sides of the fancy leaves. Now I've got my leaves on there, and it's time to add my prayer sentiment to the top. So everything's finally coming together, and I started to glue it, but I decided to bring my glue pen back in. It's so much easier, and it's stickier, so it's going to dry fast, and I won't have to like wait. So I just brought that back in. So now I am using my tweezers. These are just the Cricut tweezers. I do also have the EK tweezers, but these were handy, so I just started using my Cricut tools to put this card together. So now I'm just layering that prayer sentiment right over the top of those peonies so that yeah, like I said, I just really love how everything layers. It doesn't, I'm okay with white space, and I'm okay with layers. I think it just adds to. I'm using foam squares to pop that second sentiment up, and I just use, as you've seen, I just glued the prayers straight down to the card, and then I'm cutting some of these down so they fit on the back of that sentiment because it's so small. And that way I can get that dimension with that sending hugs and piece to the sentiment. I should have probably added a couple more pieces of cardstock to the back of that just to give that a little bit more sturdiness, but it was a little uneven, so I cut a little piece off. But anyway, it ultimately ended up working fine. So then the foam tape was showing, so I had to cut the foam tape off. You know, you make it work. So on this card, I used the Perhaps sentiment, the first one that I really loved, and I needed to trim it down so it fit inside the card. Ultimately, I trimmed it down a little bit too much. However, it was fine. I didn't care. Just because once I trimmed it on one side, and I trimmed it on the other side, I had them uneven. And yeah, see, and now it's uneven. And it fits perfect, but, you know, what are you going to do? So now I'm going to trim it down a little more, still uneven. So I trim it down more, and it ends up working out fine. It adds the sturdiness to the card that I wanted. And, you know, it's fine. I trimmed it too much on that side, so then I had to go back to the other side. Yeah, no. And so there we go. And now I should have used the tape runner, but I ended up using the glue. So then I had to, it kind of warped the card a little bit, but after it dried, it was fine. So now for the second card, because I'm still trying to figure out how I can make this more of an elegant card, I feel like it needs a little something. And I'm bringing in my Master Layouts 2, and I'm going to use, I end up using, so I'm going back and forth this side. I know I want a background layer to this. I'm deciding if I need a background panel, and I do end up going with a black background panel. And I end up cutting this out with the stitched die cut from Gina K Designs, Master Layouts. Is that 2? Yeah, 2. And so, and then I want that outer layer, so I'm deciding on how much it's going to give me when I cut that down. So it's still going to give me a pretty good little background. I didn't want a lot, so that worked out perfect. So I brought in my black cardstock, and I first cut out that larger piece for the background panel. And you'll notice it didn't cut out completely, and which was kind of a bummer because the cardstock gets crooked, but I make it work. But see how it didn't cut out, so I kind of lined it back up, and I think it shifted in as I was putting it through the die cutting machine because it turns out crooked, but I didn't notice it till I actually added it to the card. So then I have to play around with that a little bit to make that work. See, I think it shifted right there. And so now I brought that out, but like I said, I didn't notice it until I put it on my card base. And now I'm bringing in that stitched piece so I can get that. This one has to be centered. I need to make sure that that stays And I am going to have to play around with the dials a little bit more so I can make sure. I run this through like 3 or 4 times so I can make sure I get a good cut before I take it out, because I don't want that happening the second time, as far as it not cutting out all the way. But I think I just need to mess with my dials on the side again and get that a little more, the settings a little more dialed in. Okay, so now I'm taping my black piece of cardstock to the white card base. And this is where I tape it down and I make a mess because, again, lining things up is my worst nightmare. However, the card was crooked. And at first I don't notice that it's the black panel's crooked. But see how it's uneven? And so then I take the whole thing off again, rip my card base, making a mess. It's not horrible, though. And then I try lining it up, and finally I realized that the card is crooked. The base, the card, not the base, but the card panel is crooked. So I ended up, I'm just like, you know what? I played with it a little bit, and then I finally said, this is fine. I need to get this card out. I need to get it done. And in the end, it's just paper, and the heart behind it is there. But see, that's where I noticed where it's crooked, and so then I just went with it. It didn't matter to me anymore. So now I am using the foam tape again to pop up the back of my blended piece. And it's funny because I didn't realize it at the time, but when I cut this down, I couldn't put 3 peonies on it. I could only use 2. At least that's what I felt. I was going to have to smush them too far together to get them to fit right on that panel piece because I cut it down. So I end up using 2, but I used the delicate leaves instead of the fancy leaves because the fancy leaves, like I said, I just didn't feel like they went with this card, the background of this card. It was a little bit not as elegant as I felt like the fancy leaves deserves. So now I'm using foam tape and popping up these peonies and, deciding where they're going to go. And I did just use 2 layers this time. 2 peonies this time. And then I bring in the delicate leaves. And again, I popped up the peonies, but I am just using the Connect glue to put it on the, put it straight onto the cardstock. I think my glue got stuck and I ended up bringing a pin in to unclog it while I'm working here, but it worked out well. Yeah, see, that looks just so much better than the fancy leaves did. Yeah, it's clogged. I'm trying to get it out. I have to bring in the pin and clean that out. And I don't mind if it goes off the panel a little bit. I actually like that. It just adds interest to the card. And the other thing is I'm using the Tim Holtz glass mat, and it's moving around a lot while I'm crafting. So I ultimately have upgraded since then. I use the word ultimately a lot. I've since then upgraded to the Glassboard Studios glass mat. I'll use this on my other craft table when I'm just figuring out my projects, but here I brought in the heavier duty one so that it doesn't move around a lot, and that way I don't have that happening while I'm recording my videos. I love the Tim Holtz glass mat. I don't love how it was moving around. It doesn't like stay put in place. Isn't that beautiful? So now I'm bringing in my sentiment, the same sentiment, sending hugs and prayers. Using the glue pen to lay down the prayers part and popping up again on the back of the sending hugs and my foam squares, my smaller cut foam squares. On the original card, the first card, not the original, on the first card, I put the sentiment to the left, and on this card, I put the sentiment to, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. I put the sentiment to the right on the first card, and on the second card, this one, I end up putting the sentiment to the left, and I think either way looked great, so I just did you know, two different opposite ends to kind of, I don't know, tickle my fancy. So that way I have both looks. And again, I just lay that prayer sentiment right on top of the peonies. Pretty much the exact same design, but they look totally different, these two cards do. Which I think is pretty impressive that out of one stamp set you can get such diversity in your card making. You have so many different options. And there we go. I'm just pressing that down really good to the cardstock. And then I'm using the foam squares, like I said, to pop up that second sending hugs and. Now it's beautiful. And I put that on the left side. Again, getting things even. Catherine Zilke, or Kathy Zilski, I think I'm saying that right. Kathy Zilski uses a T ruler to get her thing straight, and I have one. I just think I need to start using it. And because as far as eyeballing goes, I am not good at it. It is hard for me, and especially if the cardstock is crooked. Okay, so here's the two cards. I think they both turned out great. I do think that they need a little something more. And so I end up bringing in my Nuvo drops that you'll see here in a second. And I'm going to add some little, I'm trying to look for colors that are matching. So I end up using the pearl on the white, no, I'm sorry. I used the pearl on the blended card. And then on the tone-on-tone white card, I used the pink. And I love Nuvo drops, and I don't use these very often, but I think I need to. I mean, I guess I don't use them very often. I mean, I really just started crafting again a couple months ago, and I haven't crafted in 7 years, and I have all the things. It's so much fun. I didn't lose interest. I started another business. So now these are old, so I'm testing to make sure that they still are coming out great. And these are probably at least 7 years old. So I am impressed at how well they held up throughout the years. But back to my story, I started another business, and so I didn't have time to craft. Since then, that business, it actually made it, and I was making money, but I got tired of doing client work, and I decided I wanted to go back to my first love, and I could probably just do this and earn an income just doing what I love. So here I am adding the Nuvo drops. These dry flatter, so I want to add enough, and I'm trying to get that. It has that little whip on top, and I really don't want that. But I also thought 3 of these little dots were not enough, so I added a couple more, and I thought that was the perfect number, 5. Because you always want to keep it on odd, 1, 3s, or 5s. Anything over 5, the sky's the limit. Well, I mean, you know, use discretion. But 1, 3s, and 5s generally is what works. You want to go with odd numbers. So there we go. I have 3 leaves. I did only use the 2 peonies, but I think because I have 3 leaves and the 5 dots, it just works, and it looks good. So there you have it. Thank you so much for joining me today in today's video. And if you will, like and subscribe to my channel. It'll help me to grow this little craft gig.